Do you even have a degree? The question fell across the room like a sudden silence, and every person at the table turned to look at the woman holding a coffee tray. Daniel Whitmore had asked the question calmly, almost casually, but the meaning behind it was clear. In his world, titles opened doors. Resumes created opportunities. Degrees separated experts from everyone else. And standing in front of him was Emily Carter, a waitress wearing a simple black uniform, holding a tray while surrounded by executives in tailored suits. She did not lower her eyes. She did not argue. She simply stood there, quietly waiting. Nobody in that boardroom knew that one answer from her would change the way they saw intelligence forever. Welcome to a story about a woman who was overlooked, underestimated, and almost invisible to the people around her. Emily Carter was 27 years old and worked at one of Manhattan's busiest restaurants. Every day, she carried coffee, delivered meals, remembered complicated orders, and listened to conversations happening between people who believed they were the most knowledgeable people in the room. To them, she was part of the background. Someone who passed by tables. Someone who cleaned up after important meetings. Someone whose opinions were never requested. But Emily had learned something years ago. Silence did not mean emptiness. Sometimes, the quietest person in the room was simply the one paying the closest attention. After each shift, while others rushed home, Emily stayed awake reading business reports, studying market trends, and writing notes in an old notebook she kept inside her apartment. It was not a luxury habit. It was simply something she had always done. She loved learning. She loved understanding how things worked. But life had taken her down a different road than she once imagined. Meanwhile, Daniel Whitmore had built his reputation on making decisions quickly. As the CEO of Whitmore Technologies, he had spent years surrounded by investors, advisors, and professionals with impressive backgrounds. He believed experience mattered. He believed preparation mattered. But over time, he also began believing that intelligence had a certain appearance. It wore expensive suits. It sat in conference rooms. It carried impressive credentials. That afternoon, Daniel was meeting with his board members to discuss an important company decision. The conversation was filled with numbers, projections, and complicated strategies. Every person in the room had a title. Every person had a reason to be there. Then Emily walked in with coffee. She placed each cup carefully on the table, hoping to leave unnoticed. But one sentence caught her attention. A small mistake hidden inside a larger discussion. A detail that everyone else had overlooked. She hesitated. She knew her place in the room according to everyone else. She was the waitress. They were the executives. But sometimes, truth does not care about titles. Sometimes, the person nobody expects to speak is the person who sees what everyone else missed. Emily quietly placed the final cup down and prepared to walk away. Then Daniel noticed her expression. He looked up and asked the question that would change everything. Do you even have a degree? The room became still, and Emily finally answered. For a few seconds, nobody in the room moved. The executives looked from Daniel to Emily, waiting for her reaction. Some expected embarrassment. Others expected silence. But Emily simply placed the coffee tray on the edge of the table and looked at him with calm eyes. She had heard that question before. Not those exact words, perhaps, but the meaning behind them. People often decided who she was before they ever knew her name. I do not think my degree is the most important thing about me, Mr. Whitmore, Emily said softly. Her voice was steady, not defensive. That answer surprised him. Daniel leaned back in his chair, studying her carefully. Most people became nervous when speaking to him. Most people tried to impress him. Emily did neither. She simply answered and waited. The board members exchanged quiet glances. They were used to confidence, but this was different. There was no arrogance in her voice. Only certainty. Emily Carter had spent years learning how to disappear in plain sight. At the restaurant where she worked, customers rarely remembered her name. They remembered their table number. They remembered their orders. They remembered the service. But they rarely wondered about the person carrying the tray. And Emily was comfortable with that. She never needed attention. She never searched for approval. Her life had taught her that being underestimated could sometimes become an advantage. When people stopped looking closely, they revealed more than they realized. Emily had discovered this during countless evenings at the restaurant. She heard investors discussing decisions. She listened to entrepreneurs explain problems. She watched successful people reveal their strengths and weaknesses through simple conversations. She was not judging them. She was learning from them. Years earlier, Emily had dreamed of sitting in rooms like this one. She had filled notebooks with ideas, studied business strategies, and spent countless hours understanding how companies grew and failed. Her small apartment was filled with books, handwritten notes, and old documents that showed a different version of her life. But circumstances had changed her path. Instead of entering the business world, she entered the service industry. She learned patience. She learned observation. She learned that intelligence was not always recognized immediately. Across the table, Daniel Whitmore continued watching her. He had expected an explanation. He had expected her to defend herself. Instead, she remained composed. That bothered him more than he wanted to admit. Not because she had challenged him, but because she had not needed to. "You seem very confident for someone who just walked into a board meeting," Daniel said. Emily glanced at the documents on the table. "I was only bringing coffee, sir." A small smile appeared on her face. But sometimes people notice things while they are simply doing their job. The room became quiet again. Those words were simple, almost too simple. Yet something about them stayed with everyone. Daniel looked down at the papers in front of him. The discussion continued, but his attention had changed. For the first time, he was not looking at Emily as a waitress. He was wondering what he had failed to notice. And without anyone realizing it, the person standing at the edge of the room had just become the most interesting person in it. Daniel Whitmore had spent most of his career believing that success had a certain image. It was found in polished offices, expensive suits, and carefully written resumes. He had built Whitmore Technologies by surrounding himself with people who had impressive backgrounds and recognized achievements. In his mind, those things were proof. They were evidence that someone could handle pressure, solve problems, and make difficult decisions. But that afternoon, something about Emily Carter stayed in his thoughts. She was not trying to prove anything. She was not asking for approval. She simply noticed something that everyone else had missed. And that was unusual. After the meeting ended, Daniel remained in the boardroom longer than usual. The papers were still spread across the table. The coffee cups were still there. The conversation was over, but his curiosity had only started. He looked again at the numbers the executives had been discussing. There was a concern hidden inside the presentation, a small inconsistency that could affect the entire strategy. Emily had noticed it within seconds. His team of experienced professionals had spent hours reviewing the same information and never mentioned it. Daniel picked up the report and looked closer. He did not like admitting when he was wrong. In fact, he had built a reputation for always having the answer. But he also knew one important thing. Good leaders did not ignore information just because it came from an unexpected source. Meanwhile, Emily returned to the restaurant floor. The moment had passed, and she went back to her usual routine. She refilled drinks, organized tables, and greeted customers with the same quiet professionalism she always showed. To everyone around her, it was just another workday. Her coworkers did not know what had happened upstairs. They did not know that a room full of executives had stopped to listen to her. Emily never mentioned it. She had no interest in becoming the center of attention. That evening, after her shift ended, she walked home through the busy streets of Manhattan. The city lights reflected against the windows of tall buildings around her. For many people, those buildings represented opportunity and success. For Emily, they represented a world she once thought she would enter. A world she had stepped away from years ago. Inside her small apartment, she placed her bag on the table and opened the same notebook she had carried for years. The pages were filled with handwritten ideas, business observations, and notes from articles she had studied late at night. She did not write them because she expected recognition. She wrote them because learning had always been part of who she was. The next morning, Daniel arrived at his office earlier than usual. His assistant noticed the change immediately. "You seem distracted today," she said. Daniel looked toward the city outside his window. "I met someone yesterday," he replied. "Someone unexpected." His assistant smiled slightly, waiting for more. But Daniel did not explain. He was still trying to understand why a brief conversation with a waitress had challenged something he had believed for years. For the first time in a long time, Daniel was not searching for the most qualified person on paper. He was wondering how many talented people had been overlooked simply because nobody thought to ask what they knew. And somewhere between a busy restaurant and a quiet boardroom, a small question had opened a much bigger one. How many brilliant minds were hidden behind ordinary appearances? The following morning, the atmosphere inside Whitmore Technologies felt different. The glass walls, polished floors, and quiet offices looked exactly the same, but Daniel Whitmore saw them differently. He walked through the building carrying the same confidence he always had, yet his thoughts were somewhere else. A simple conversation with a waitress had created a question he could not ignore. How many people had he overlooked because he only saw what was visible? At 10 o'clock, Daniel entered the executive conference room for another strategy meeting. Around the table sat some of the brightest minds in the company. Senior managers, financial analysts, and advisors with years of experience reviewed the upcoming expansion plan. The presentation moved smoothly at first. Numbers appeared on the screen. Charts were explained. Everyone nodded. It was the kind of meeting Daniel had attended hundreds of times. But something felt incomplete. He looked at the same documents Emily had glanced at the day before. There was still that small detail bothering him. A projection that did not match the customer data. A number that seemed slightly out of place. Has anyone reviewed this assumption again? Daniel asked. The room became quiet for a moment. One of the executives explained that the information had been checked several times. The answer was professional, confident, expected, but Daniel was not satisfied. Check it one more time, he said. His team members exchanged curious looks. Daniel Whitmore was known for making fast decisions. He was not known for asking the same question twice. Later that afternoon, Daniel returned to the restaurant. He told himself it was only because he wanted a quiet place to think. He told himself it had nothing to do with curiosity. But when Emily approached his table with a polite smile, he immediately noticed something different. She was exactly the same as before. Calm, professional, focused. She placed a glass of water on the table and waited for his order. Emily, Daniel said. She looked surprised that he remembered her name. Yes, Mr. Whitmore. He studied her for a moment. How did you notice that issue yesterday? Emily paused. She understood what he meant. I was only listening, she replied. Daniel leaned slightly forward. Most people heard the conversation. You understood it. Emily looked down briefly at the notepad in her hand. Sometimes the smallest details tell you the most. Her answer was simple, but Daniel recognized something behind it. Discipline. Experience. A way of thinking that did not come from trying to impress others. It came from years of observing and learning. You mentioned yesterday that a degree is not the most important thing about a person, Daniel said. Emily gave a small nod. Because knowledge and opportunity are not always given at the same time. The word stayed with him. Daniel had spent years searching for talent through interviews, applications, and recommendations. Yet here was someone who had never entered his system at all. Someone who had been standing nearby the entire time. He looked around the restaurant. People were talking. Servers were moving between tables. Life continued as normal. But Daniel now understood something he had never considered before. Sometimes the greatest talent was not missing. Sometimes it was simply waiting for someone to finally notice. The next few days brought a change that nobody at Whitmore Technologies expected. Daniel Whitmore, a man known for trusting numbers more than instincts, began asking different questions. He no longer looked only at resumes, positions, or years of experience. He started paying attention to the people around him, the small observations, the quiet suggestions, the voices that were usually ignored. Meanwhile, Emily Carter continued living the same routine. She arrived at the restaurant before the evening rush, tied her apron, and prepared for another long shift. Nothing about her appearance suggested that she had recently challenged the thinking of one of Manhattan's most successful executives. She was still the same person who remembered customers' favorite drinks and greeted everyone with the same calm smile. But Daniel now saw something he had missed before. He saw intention behind every action. One evening, Daniel invited Emily to a private meeting at the restaurant after her shift. He did not bring a team. He did not bring documents. He simply wanted to understand. Emily sat across from him at a quiet table near the window. Outside, the city moved quickly. Cars passed. People walked along the sidewalks. But inside, the conversation was calm. I want to ask you something, Daniel said. How did you learn to analyze business situations like that? Emily looked at the table for a moment. She had expected this question. I studied business for several years, she explained. I spent a lot of time learning about management, finance, and strategy. Daniel nodded. So you did go to college? Emily smiled slightly. Yes. There was no pride in her voice. No attempt to prove him wrong. Just a simple fact. Why did you never mention it? Daniel asked. Emily looked toward the restaurant floor, where her co-workers were finishing their work. Because nobody usually asks. Those words were quiet, but they carried weight. Daniel understood the meaning behind them. He had been one of those people. He had seen the uniform before seeing the person. Emily continued explaining that education had always mattered to her, but life did not always follow a perfect plan. After college, unexpected responsibilities changed her path. She took the job at the restaurant because it provided stability, and over time, she discovered that learning did not stop just because a career looked different from what she imagined. Knowledge does not disappear because nobody sees it, she said. Daniel listened carefully. For someone who spent his life leading conversations, he found himself doing something unfamiliar. He was simply listening. The next morning, Daniel returned to the office with a different mindset. He called his leadership team together and asked them to review the company decision from a new perspective. Not from the perspective of titles. Not from the perspective of who had the highest position, but from the perspective of who had the best insight. Some executives were surprised. Others were uncertain. The culture of the company had always valued authority. Now Daniel was asking them to value awareness. And slowly, everyone began to understand why Emily had made such an impression. She had not walked into the boardroom trying to prove she belonged there. She had simply brought knowledge into a place that was willing to overlook it. Sometimes the most valuable voice is not the loudest one. Sometimes it is the voice that has been patiently waiting for someone to listen. For the first time in years, Daniel Whitmore found himself looking beyond the surface. He had spent decades building a company based on analysis, strategy, and careful decisions. Yet he realized that one of his biggest mistakes was not in business. It was in the way he saw people. Emily Carter had not changed. The world around her had changed because someone finally took the time to notice her. A few weeks earlier, she had been another familiar face in a restaurant filled with customers who rarely remembered the names of the people serving them. Now, she was sitting in conversations where ideas mattered more than appearances. But Emily remained careful. She knew attention could disappear as quickly as it arrived. She had seen people become interested in her knowledge only after discovering her background. That was not what she wanted. She wanted people to value the person, not just the information she carried. One afternoon, Daniel invited Emily to visit the Whitmore Technologies office. He wanted her opinion on a new project, but he also wanted his team to experience something important. He wanted them to understand that talent did not always arrive through traditional paths. When Emily entered the office building, she noticed the same thing she had seen from the outside for years. The tall glass windows. The busy employees. The conference rooms where important decisions were made. But this time, she was not walking through as a visitor. She was being invited inside. Daniel introduced her to his leadership team. Some members welcomed her immediately. Others remained uncertain. They were polite, but they still wondered why a waitress was sitting at their table. Emily noticed their expressions, but did not take offense. She understood them. She had once been exactly where they were. The meeting began with a discussion about improving customer experience. Executives presented reports, surveys, and complicated analysis. Emily listened quietly. She took notes. She waited. Then Daniel asked, "What do you think?" The room turned toward her. For a moment, Emily felt the familiar pressure of being judged before speaking. But she remembered something important. She was not there to impress anyone. She was there because her perspective had value. Emily explained that companies often focus too much on numbers and not enough on human behavior. She shared observations from years of working directly with customers. She described small details that reports could not always capture. The way people reacted, the moments when customers felt ignored, the simple changes that could create trust. The room became quieter with every sentence. Not because she was trying to dominate the conversation, because she was making everyone think. After the meeting, one of the executives approached Daniel. "Where did you find her?" he asked. Daniel looked toward Emily, who was standing near the window reading through the notes from the meeting. "She was there the entire time," he answered. "We just never thought to ask." That evening, Emily returned to the restaurant for her regular shift. She tied her apron, greeted her coworkers, and continued doing what she had always done. But now Daniel understood something that his years of success had never taught him. A person's potential is not always displayed by the position they hold. Sometimes it is hidden behind ordinary moments, waiting for someone with enough humility to recognize it. The weeks that followed changed the atmosphere inside Whitmore Technologies in ways nobody expected. It was not because of a new business strategy or a major announcement. It was because people started paying attention to something they had ignored for years. They started listening. Before Emily Carter entered the company, many employees believed great ideas came from specific people: executives, consultants, experts with impressive backgrounds. But Emily quietly challenged that belief. She showed them that insight could come from experience, curiosity, and paying attention to the details others missed. Daniel Whitmore noticed the change more than anyone. He began spending less time proving he was the smartest person in the room and more time creating space for others to speak. It was a small adjustment, but for someone like Daniel, it represented something much bigger. For years, his confidence had been built on being certain. Now, he was learning the value of being open. One morning, Daniel invited Emily to another meeting. This time, it was not because there was a problem to solve. It was because he wanted her perspective from the beginning. When Emily entered the conference room, the reaction was different. The same people who once wondered why she was there now greeted her with respect. They asked for her opinion. They listened before responding. Emily noticed the difference, but she remained humble. She did not act like she had won something. She simply took her seat and focused on the discussion. During the meeting, the team reviewed a new customer service initiative. Several executives presented ideas based on data and market research. Their suggestions were thoughtful, but Emily noticed something missing. The numbers explained what customers were doing. They did not fully explain why customers felt the way they did. She raised her hand slightly. "May I share another perspective?" she asked. The room became quiet. Emily explained that customers were not just looking for faster service or better products. They wanted to feel understood. She described moments from the restaurant that revealed how small interactions could create lasting impressions. A remembered name, a thoughtful question, a simple moment where someone felt valued. Nobody interrupted. Nobody dismissed her. They listened. After the meeting, several team members stayed behind to discuss her ideas. One executive who had once questioned her place in the room admitted that her observations had changed the way he viewed customer relationships. Emily accepted the compliment with a quiet smile. She never wanted people to be impressed by her story. She wanted them to understand the lesson behind it. That evening, Daniel walked through the empty office after everyone had left. The city lights reflected across the windows, and he thought about how many people he had judged too quickly throughout his career. He had always believed that finding talent was about searching in the right places. Now he understood something different. Sometimes talent was already there. Sometimes it was standing nearby, carrying a coffee tray, waiting for someone to ask the right question. The greatest change was not that Emily entered Daniel's world. It was that Daniel finally learned how to see beyond his own. Daniel Whitmore had spent many years believing that leadership meant having the right answers. He believed a strong leader needed confidence, experience, and the ability to make decisions before anyone else. But after meeting Emily Carter, he discovered something he had forgotten. Sometimes leadership was not about speaking first. Sometimes it was about knowing when to listen. As Emily continued contributing to Whitmore Technologies, she never asked for special treatment. She arrived prepared. She shared her ideas. She respected everyone around her. She was not trying to replace anyone. She was simply adding value where she could. That was what made people respect her even more. One afternoon, Daniel asked Emily to join him for a conversation in his office. The view from the top floor showed the entire city of Manhattan below. For many people, that office represented achievement. For Daniel, it represented years of hard work and countless decisions. But now, he saw it as a reminder that success meant nothing if you stopped learning. "I want to thank you," Daniel said. Emily looked surprised. "For what?" "For reminding me that I was looking in the wrong places." Emily remained quiet, allowing him to continue. Daniel explained that throughout his career, he had created systems to find talented people. He reviewed applications. He studied credentials. He searched for individuals who looked ready for success. But he had never considered how many talented people were excluded before they even had a chance to speak. "You were standing right in front of us," Daniel said. "And nobody thought to ask what you knew." Emily smiled softly. Sometimes people are afraid to look deeper. It is easier to believe what they already expect. Her words stayed with him. Daniel knew she was right. The next month, Whitmore Technologies introduced a new approach to recognizing employee ideas. The company created opportunities for people from every department to share their thoughts. It did not matter if someone worked in an office, managed operations, or interacted directly with customers every day. Everyone had a voice. The change was not dramatic overnight. It was something smaller, a shift in perspective. People began asking different questions. Instead of asking, "What position does this person have?" they started asking, "What can this person teach us?" Emily continued working at the restaurant while helping the company on special projects. She never forgot where she came from. She still greeted customers with the same kindness. She still treated every person with respect, regardless of their background. One evening, Daniel visited the restaurant again. He watched Emily move through the room with the same quiet confidence she had always shown. Nothing about her had changed. The difference was that now people finally understood what had been there all along. She had never needed a title to prove her intelligence. She had never needed a room full of executives to validate her ability. She had always carried her knowledge with patience and humility. Daniel looked around the restaurant and realized something that would stay with him forever. The world was full of people with hidden strengths. But recognizing them required something many successful people forgot to practice: humility. Because sometimes the person who has the most to offer is the person everyone else has already decided to overlook. Months passed, but the lesson Emily Carter brought into Whitmore Technologies remained long after the first conversation ended. The company had changed, but not because of a new strategy or a major investment. It had changed because people began seeing each other differently. Employees who once stayed quiet during meetings started sharing their ideas. Managers who once focused only on experience and qualifications started paying attention to creativity and dedication. A new culture slowly grew inside the company. One built on respect. One built on listening. Daniel Whitmore noticed every change. He still worked hard. He still expected excellence. But something inside him was different. The confidence that once made him ignore unexpected voices had become the awareness that allowed him to recognize them. One afternoon, Daniel attended a company event where employees from different departments shared their stories. He watched people who had spent years working behind the scenes finally receive recognition for their contributions. It reminded him of Emily's journey, not because she was the only talented person in the world, but because she represented something much larger. There were countless people carrying knowledge, creativity, and potential that others never discovered. After the event, Daniel found Emily standing near the entrance, speaking with a few employees. She was not surrounded by attention. She was not looking for praise. She was simply encouraging others the same way she had always encouraged herself. "You know," Daniel said as he approached her, "I think you changed more than just this company." Emily smiled. "I think everyone was already capable of change. They just needed a reason to look differently." Daniel nodded. He understood what she meant. The greatest lesson was never about one waitress proving she was intelligent. It was about a world that too often decided someone's value before hearing their story. Years later, people at Whitmore Technologies still remembered the moment when a simple conversation changed the way they viewed talent. New employees heard about the woman who entered a boardroom without a title, without a position, and without trying to impress anyone. They heard about how she spoke with confidence, not because she wanted to stand above others, but because she believed every idea deserved a chance to be heard. Emily eventually continued building her own path. She worked on projects that reflected her passion for learning and helping others. But she never stopped appreciating the simple moments that shaped her. The quiet mornings before a restaurant shift. The evenings spent reading and studying. The years when nobody noticed what she carried inside. Because those moments built the person she became. Daniel also carried that lesson with him for the rest of his career. Whenever he met someone new, he remembered the mistake he had once made. He remembered that intelligence did not always announce itself. Sometimes it arrived quietly. Sometimes it wore ordinary clothes. Sometimes it stood beside the table holding a coffee tray. And sometimes, all it needed was one person willing to ask, one person willing to listen, and one moment of respect to reveal what had been there all along. Because the quiet ones are never truly ordinary. They are simply waiting for the world to see them.